My name is Richard Wakefield and I live in London, Ontario. Is the human causation for global warming, the scientific consensus, starting to fall apart? This certainly could be the case. More and more scientists are willing to present evidence that global warming is not exclusively, or at all, caused by humans. 3 documentaries have exposed the fatal flaws in the IPCC version of global warming. The Great Global Warming Swindle put out by the BBC exposed the climate of fear made in the US, and global warming doomsday called off by the CBC here in Canada. But what about the scientific consensus? A consensus does not make a theory fact. Consensuses have been wrong before. In the 1970s, when temps were falling, the consensus was that we were heading to a new ice age. Now temps are rising again, so that consensus had to be abandoned for this new one. Things are certainly going to happen to make this current consensus wrong. The scientific consensus has been wrong before, of course, and in fact there is a specific example of this happening right now today in biology. The current consensus in taxonomy is the Linnaean system of classification. It's been around for almost 200 years, but it is grossly flawed with the arrival of new evidence, the phylogenetics of organisms themselves. Here's an example. Birds, reptiles, and mammals are put in the hierarchy of class. Dinosaurs are in a subclass of the reptiles. But the paleontological evidence now shows us that birds came from dinosaurs. So how can a class come from a subclass? At the lower levels of taxonomy, genera and species, beetle phylogeny is making the whole Linnaean system incompatible. There is a move to replace the Linnaean hierarchy with a computer-based system called the phylocode, but it is getting huge resistance. Few in the biological community are willing to abandon the Linnaean system, even those who recognize its fatal flaws. In fact, dismantling the Linnaean system would put the entire Linnaean Society of London, who rubber stamp names applied to species, out of a job. So it is not unlikely that the scientific consensus on human causation of global warming may actually be wrong as more evidence emerges. Bottom line is, evidence trumps dogma. Professor Tom Siegelstadt was recently quoted in a Canadian newspaper, the Financial Post, that, quote, "The IPCC needs a lesson in geology to avoid making fundamental mistakes. Most leading geologists throughout the world know that the IPCC's view of Earth's processes are implausible, if not impossible." And let's have a look at some of this evidence that does not support the human causation for global warming. First off, world temperature started to rise in the mid to late 1800s to about 1940. There's no way our CO2 emissions could have caused this. The vast majority of our CO2 output occurs after the 1950s. Peer-reviewed scientific papers have shown that the solar cycle matches the change in temperature. Between 1940 and 1975, the temperature dropped. So did the sun's activity. That was when we heard the scientific consensus of us heading into another ice age. Contrary to what the man hockey stick of world temperatures over the last 1,000 years claims, the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age did in fact happen worldwide. The medieval warm period was 300 years of warmer weather than we have now, or projected to have by the IPCC. It was a time of flourishing human activity. It's hard to understand how over such a long period of time that such a warming spell was only in Europe and Greenland, or the Northern Hemisphere. It's been shown to also be in the Southern Hemisphere. Ice core samples, the physical evidence, shows that the world heated up before CO2 levels increased, the opposite of what people like Al Gore are saying. It's the warming that caused the CO2 to increase, not the other way around. CO2 levels in the geological past were much higher, 3 to 4 times higher than today. It's thought that these higher levels of CO2 is what allowed the sauropod dinosaurs to evolve to be so large. Plants grew just much faster. It also shows that higher levels of CO2 will not kill the planet, as some claim. Now you may claim that so they have their evidence too, but realize that not all evidence is created equal. Some evidence can trump others. If the solar output is responsible for the current warming trend, then whatever evidence there is for CO2 to be the culprit must be wrong and have some other explanation. There are only 2 things that we need to look at when trying to decide if we need to act or not for this climate change. 1, the assumption that global warming will be a disaster, and 2, is it possible to reverse the change? What are the current myths that are floating around over a warmer future? The main one is that higher temperatures in the future will leave the world uninhabitable. Even noted scientist James Lovelock is now claiming that it will get so warm that humans might be able to etch out a living only along the Arctic Circle. Al Gore goes even further by now claiming if we don't act to save the Earth, we're going to resemble Venus. But is this a rational prediction? What physical evidence is there to support the doom and gloom? None. It's just predictions. The average global temperature can rise without there being an increase in the hottest times. For example, if the average is 0 with highs of 30 C and lows of minus 30 C, and the planet heats up to be more moderate, we can get an average temperature of 10 C without a higher upper temperature. This is likely what will happen and has happened in the past. More moderate temperatures with an overall higher average. This certainly looks like what happened in 55 million years ago when the world was 8 C warmer than today. Tropical forests existed over most of the globe up to the Arctic Circle, including palm trees growing in Greenland. This can happen if the lower range of temperature increases, but the upper temperature does not. In fact, a look at the paleo temperatures throughout geological time and you will see that the world underwent most of its time in warmer periods much higher than today. This is temperatures throughout the past 400 million years in this graphic. That's us at the very right near the bottom of the current cooling time. This next graph shows the current era expanded, showing the medieval warming period and the Little Ice Age. And this graph is a much narrower view of time, showing clearly that we're periods much warmer than today, and hence we are not going to overheat. Thus it is clear that even if the Earth warms so much as to melt all the ice at the poles, which some scientists claim would take thousands of years of such temperatures, life will flourish. It's quite possible that we may actually need warmer temperatures in the near future to save our bacon. Another myth floating around is that CO2 is a pollutant, but it's not. It's a very, very small component, normal component, of the atmosphere. And in the past, it was up to 4 times what we have today. If anything, we are currently in a CO2 low in geological history. Siegelstadt sums up with, those who claim that CO2 lasts decades or centuries have no such measurements or their physical evidence to support their claims. It is all fiction. So neither of these two myths support any contention that the world is going to be a worse place in the future due to global warming. It may be a great thing for humanity to not have to heat our homes in the winter, for example. The other myth, which requires the doom and gloom scenario, is the only scenario, is that we can and must fix this problem. We must reverse the warming trend by reducing CO2 by reducing fossil fuel use. There is no evidence we can actually turn this trend around, even if we are causing it. Under Kyoto's ultimate target, the Western world will be required to reduce CO2 by 80% of today's consumption. This is just not possible. The problem is people's lives in our high consumptive society depend upon the status quo. The only way we could turn CO2 around would be to almost shut the use of fossil fuel down, which means almost shutting down society. This will kill people. People are calling for alternatives to fossil fuels, but none that are on the drawing board can be scaled up or scaled up in time to replace oil. In many places where oil is required, there simply is no alternative. It's needed to feed the more than 6 billion people. It's required to heat people's homes. Changing the millions of miles of natural gas piping to another alternative would take decades and cost tens of billions. Oil is also required for the goods that are made, transported, and sold, which provides taxes for government programs like healthcare. Without the oil, wealth generation would evaporate, and so with it would taxes. Bottom line is we just can't turn times around like they were in the 1800s with 12 times the mouths to feed. It's not even looking at what the costs of adhering to Kyoto would be. Money funneled away from other issues such as medical research, which has a much higher payback than supposed solutions to global warming.